George Washington Carver's 9-weed sandwich. There was a lot more to George Washington Carver than the peanut scientist of Tuskegee. In a recent biography, historian Gary Kremer calls Carver an extraordinarily complex man living in an extremely complicated society. Kremer's book explores Carver's life story against a backdrop of his times. Segments that situate Carver in his historical context illuminate a dynamic era of African American history that is only vaguely known to many readers, that expansive time from Reconstruction through Jim Crow. Carver was born in Missouri, but after the Civil War, when the southern state governments grew hostile to the recently freed slaves, he joined the exodusters heading for Kansas in the first large out-migration of African Americans from the South. The young teenager, still known as Carver's George, went to Kansas not only in search of a formal education, but also of a destiny. He developed his work skills, cultivated his spirituality, and communed with nature. He pursued his education with a sense of purposeful self-direction that continued throughout his life. Carver was in the process of discovering his gift for teaching at Iowa State College when Booker T. Washington recruited him to direct the Agricultural Experimental Station at Tuskegee Institute. When he arrived in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1896, Carver recalls, everything looked hungry: the land, the cotton, the cattle, and the people. His life work became to restore the vitality of the soil and nourish the people. Carver never lived a life of racial equality. Twice, he was unnerved by his close proximity to lynch mobs. During one of the highlights of his career, when he testified before Congress, he was subjected to a racial slur from a congressman. Carver was known as the godfather of chemurgy, which means using organic products for industrial purposes. He inspired Henry Ford to think about using hemp and soy for car parts. When Henry Ford hosted a dinner for chemurgy pioneers, Carver, because of his race, sat at a table in the hall outside the dining room. Nevertheless, Carver and Ford became friends, and when Ford visited Tuskegee, Carver served him a delicious and nutritious 9-weed sandwich that included curling dock, wild onion, chickweed, and dandelion. If this was Carver's way of commenting on the chemurgy dinner, we will never know. But we do know that Carver, despite his gifts, never lived a life of racial equality. The cigar box music you hear is the opening of Trail of Tears, played by the composer Microwave Dave Gallagher. I'm Jane DeNeefe, author of Rocket City, Rock and Soul, and co-director of Huntsville African American History Project, a digital oral history project documenting race relations in Huntsville, Alabama.